Yes, we still need to support each other as women. We still need to find ways of how we can have a seat at the table. And then once we get that seat at the table and that voice at the table, we also need to support each other and understand how we get our voice heard.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Melting Pot episode. Today, I am in conversation with the lovely Nadia Pace, whom I've had a chance to chat with for a few minutes before getting into this recording. So, just a very brief introduction to Nadia. And then, of course, Nadia is going to tell us all about herself. So, Nadia is a trusted advisor to boards and to executives and also to founders. And she is known for her expertise in strategic growth, governance, and leadership mentoring. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Nadia.
Thank you for the invitation, Payal. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, let's kickstart the conversation, Nadia, with a little bit on your background, which you had started to tell me before we started recording. A little bit about your background would be interesting for my listeners and viewers.
Yes, of course. I'm Maltese. I live in Malta currently. I've traveled around outside of Malta because of work, mostly, and I lived in Greece for about 3.5 years. So I had the opportunity to live there in my early 20s, which was a lovely experience where I studied there, I worked there. I was always, when you live on in an island, there is always that somehow there's a lot of curiosity. What is beyond this island? Because whilst when you live on an island for a long period of time, I call it the small island syndrome. Then you feel singularity. It's even though Malta, to be fair, is quite cosmopolitan. We especially lately we've had a number of foreign direct investments setting up in Malta, so we do have different cultures. It has changed quite a lot, significantly, I must admit. It's that small island syndrome is much less now, and there is a lot of possibility as well, and very well connected as an island, so that makes it all even a plus. It's a bonus for people who live here and for people who have business here and set up business here. So that's I've started when it comes to my career. We've discussed this briefly, Payal.
Yeah.
I was always intrigued to meet people, and hence this is why various positions in my executive roles were mostly of commercial nature within business to business environments. So that is where most of the time I'm supporting companies either to expand outside of Malta, or else even when I was in Greece, to expand beyond Greece. So always being an interlocutor and looking for opportunities elsewhere outside of the jurisdiction or the footprint of that particular organization. So I was mostly in commercial positions dealing with B2B companies. So companies within the B2B environment, so to speak. Following that stint as an executive, then I have set up my own business around 8 years ago. And that's again where I've started providing, but now my role evolved more into governance. So advisor to boards, again, part of companies, usually companies that are expanding and growing beyond their jurisdiction. So that's my sweet spot. This is where come in: strategy, strategic growth, leadership. And that is the space I usually operate in. And I do quite a lot of mentoring, C-suite mentoring, aspiring C-suite, which is, again, it's a very good link to the board, because when you are part of a board, it's very important. There's a lot of mentoring. There's a lot of relationship and rapport building which needs to be built outside of the boardroom itself as well. So that's on my professional side. I've a 9-month-old mother. So I have a nine-month-old daughter. She's my first one. And Paya, like I've exchanged with you a little bit before during our call, it's been a very interesting journey. It's challenging me much more than any challenging contract I've had to sign and sign off during my professional career. I am redefining all the boundaries, definitions, adaptability, resilience. It's quite a fascinating journey, let's put it this way.
I can imagine. It's completely not in parallel to what professionally you have been doing and what you've achieved. I completely understand. You know, you've mentioned somewhere that trust takes years to build, but it only takes a few seconds to lose that trust. So, what kind of what were your learnings that actually made you think like this?
During the course of my career, but also personal life, it's first of all to, on the positive side, one key takeaway, it's fantastic when you create a relationship based on trust. And then you go back to that network, to that individual, to that person. After years that you haven't spoken, you haven't had, you were out of touch or out of sync because things have happened, COVID, people move, people shift from one place to another. And you still have that conversation as if you've just met them
And
yesterday. So that's on the positive side. It's like it goes to show and also endorse the fact that once you really build a relationship based on trust, then that conversation is timeless.
yeah, correct.
And that is something I really believed in ever since from the very beginning, because as I mentioned, now linking back in a B2B environment, people make business with people. So even in a B2C environment, really and truly, there are salespersons, there are salespeople. I know there are loads of advancements in technology. Technology, in my opinion, will facilitate quite a lot, and we're seeing huge developments in each and every different industries, how that is evolving and it's unfolding. However, the value, and this is where we need to reinvent ourselves. However, the value in, especially when deals are being signed off, when commercial agreements, it's nothing beats the in-person meetings, the face-to-face meetings. This is where the real trust is built. This is where the real relationship, the real rapport. And there are easily misunderstandings, especially culturally, when you're dealing with different cultures, because there are cultural nuances that one would have to be more sensitive to. But with that emotional intelligence, by knowing people, knowing the psychology of people, how people tick basically, then one would be able to continue building on that rapport. However, checking in and not taking anything for granted. So there was a particular incident during the course, just one that I remember of, and there was a misunderstanding because one of my colleagues sent an email. It wasn't, the individual thought that it was quite abrasive and he didn't receive it in a right and correct and positive manner. And we were ready to lose that contract. Easily, you can really easily, by saying the wrong thing or by not sending the right information or the right signals, it's especially where there's distance, and nowadays we
Yeah,
really rely on technology, on different
yeah,
media or different medium. One can easily miscommunicate or pass on perhaps if the wrong message.
yeah.
So checking in.
Or yeah, the interpretation could be different from what the
Correct.
person. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Correct.
yeah, yeah,
Correct. So that's my, by and large, it's one of my mantras. It's something I really live by with, and I invest a lot of time in building relationships, building long-standing, trustworthy relationships that stand the test of time.
yeah. No, that's true. You're absolutely right. Interpersonal relationships, and they do develop over time, and then there is a sense of trust. So how has digital disruption actually changed what boards should be discussing now as compared to all those years ago when a board meeting would happen and people would be sitting around a table and nothing really much would come out of it, but it's a board meeting. So, how has, in your opinion, there been a change, or has there been a change?
Slowly but surely, not as fast as the technology itself, Payal, I
Right.
feel. At least that's
Yeah.
my experience, the experience I have so far. I feel that as non-executive directors, as serving on boards, executive, non-executive, independent, non-independent board members, we have a responsibility
Yeah.
nowadays. And the responsibility and the value which we need to add at that boardroom, at that board meeting, is even higher than it used to be before, because now the information, we have access to a lot of information, and not only the information which we expect from the executives, because we do expect the company to provide that information. We can now still access information from industry trends, benchmarks, competition, that we can easily make easily, or rather easy. We can make our assessment, we can make our judgment, we can be better prepared with the questions and the information to be able to challenge and support the executives of those organizations that we are representing in a better manner. So actually, that is how I feel that technology disruptions are going to affect the boardroom setting as we move on and going forward. And that is still a realization, I feel. So not all boards. And nowadays, we're also discussing virtual or AI NEDs. So much so that there is the opportunity. So having the opportunity to be able to look for information there and then, to be able to support that decision making and expedite matters rather than having prolonged discussions and discussions that move forward from one board meeting to another.
Yeah. Correct.
So, I
Which
think
is which
the
is what
setting, the context.
Yeah, which is what I guess it's been traditionally. And now there has to be a shake-up. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, Nadia, your improv theater life. How did that come about? That's one. When did you realize that was something that you were interested in? And if you can walk us through how you feel that your improv theater experience or love of it or whatever you may call it, you've been able to translate into your leadership building skill.
It's interesting that you picked on this, Paya, because it was for a short period of time. And
It clearly stood out.
I love, first of all, I love the theater. I
Okay.
love going to the theater. I love watching the theater. If I'm going to London, I'm gonna go to the theater. So I watch that space. I love it. I love the creativity. I love the concept, the context live. In Italian, we say the bello del vivo. It's there. It's like you're being part of it. So it was always very intriguing. So as soon as I was, during my first initial days as CEO, so that's been a while ago now. So right before I set up my own business, I felt that, first of all, again, it was a very transformational period. So it was very heavily involved. I think most of the CEOs that are listening to this podcast can relate. As a CEO, you barely have time for yourself, especially when you're going through transformation, a lot of change. You need to think about so many aspects: stakeholder management, commercial, P&L, financial management, people, culture, and so on and so forth. So I practically had no social life. I had no personal life, but I felt I really wanted to do something. I wanted to, like, an avenue where I can be myself, I can let go. And I really wanted to be with people that I really didn't really know. So I just wanted a space where I can be myself, I can have some time out, and again, release that tension without a script, basically, because improv is very improv.
Yeah.
And because also I felt that, so it had a personal reason, but equally, little did I know that it was going to have help me and support me so much into my professional life. Because again, things were changing so fast, and even nowadays, the context is still the same. So we're serving on boards, we're on the boardroom, and we have different challenges each and every single day. So, with whatever is happening geopolitically, supply chains, all the different challenges that we're dealing with. So, supporting our executives to have those set of skills to be resilient, but also adaptable. So nothing is set in stone. Everything can change, and one has to pivot very quickly, whilst trying to take this good decisions that will last for a period of time. Improv actually gives you that gives you those skills where because basically you have a set, you have a context, you have a storyline, and you just have to build it creatively there and then with a number of people, a few people that you have barely met. So
Yeah, so you don't really have that armor around you as a or that protective layer that, oh my God, I'm the CEO and there's hierarchy and there is so much that I have to, there are people that I delegate to, or none of that. You're in an environment where you're absolutely freely building your thoughts into a storytelling session and doing it impromptu without having to follow any guidelines. Of course, the guidelines are there, but in a different form. So,
in a very
yeah,
different way. And also something else, Payal, the fact that you are able during improv to put yourself in different shoes of different people and different characters.
yeah,
So that is sometimes again, so as a CEO, you step into those shoes, but very often you need to put yourself in the shoes of different people to be able to see challenges, to understand problems, to understand what you're being questioned about from a different viewpoint and a
yeah.
different perspective. So that was also a great help.
Okay, interesting. Let's pivot a little bit now towards women in leadership roles. Do you think, I know there is some EU women on boards
Yes,
directive.
yes.
So can you explain a little bit about what that is and what are the companies and should the companies be doing right now that they're not when it comes to women in leadership?
Regarding the Women Directive, which was your first question,
Yes,
Payan,
yes,
is basically there is a directive which is going to be in effect by June this year, in a few months' time, where listed companies are actually obliged to have a number of women serving on their boards. There are different details and different descriptions of what constitutes listed, the number of employees, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of the rules and regulations are all out there for everyone to be able to access them. However, what's really, even though I wave the female flag because I'm a big supporter of females in general in different roles, in different positions. It's not because of gender, Payal. For me, it wasn't. In fact, I wasn't particularly pleased when I was given the position to fill the gender role and the gender position, because I find that the positive discrimination can work against
yeah,
female. Yes, we do need, first of all, it's intriguing how into 2026 we are still discussing the fact that we are still discussing female participation at different levels of leadership. It means that there is still an issue.
yeah,
Otherwise, we're not discussing it.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
start from that so that as it in itself, it's quite telling. Okay, because otherwise it means that there isn't an issue at all. However, it's not about, for me, it is about diversity. It is about the competence. So it's not just because we are female, then we would have to be given that position and that role. We need to be able to fit, we need to be able
Yeah. And
to,
you
as
have to,
individuals,
correct.
perform
Yeah.
and
Deserve
add
it.
value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then actually, so the challenge is, how do we get a seat at the table? So it is still a challenge. So having said all that about, yes, it's about competence and it's not about gender. Yes, it's about performance and adding value and not about gender. But following that, then when you have those individuals, and there are very highly competent female within the network, I meet interesting individuals all the time, and we all share the same sentiment. It doesn't, it's actually culture agnostic almost, because it's the same in each and every country, in each and every jurisdiction. We discuss the same topics on panels, on discussions, on Women's Day, same and same narrative all over again. It is still a challenge. So one, we need, whether it is quota, whether it is directives, whether it is organizations like EWOP, the European Women on Boards, or other organizations, similar organizations, to be able to provide a platform for individuals that are capable, that are competent, to have an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And this goes not only for boards, but also for leadership positions. The leadership positions is changing and shifting. It's very much depending on industry and the industries we are discussing. It's very different retail than the oil industry, for example, even pharmaceutical, when we compare pharmaceutical to IT and technology. And so there are differences between the different industries. That said, obviously, I understand I have an added layer, which I do understand, for females who are also working mothers. That adds another level of complexity, another layer, which is not always easy, because the narrative is still there is still an expectation for working mothers to be the primary responsible individual parent for
The child. Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
So that in itself is already a challenge. That in itself is already, or an added challenge, let's put it this way. Yes, we still need to support each other as women. We still need to find ways of how we can have a seat at the table. And then once we get that seat at the table and that voice at the table, we also need to support each other and understand how we get our voice heard.
Yeah.
Because even when we get that seat, when we get that opportunity, then we still need to work and work hard to be able to come across and get that voice heard and acknowledged. I don't know, I'm not sure if I answered your question, Payal, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
multi-layered.
Correct. No, yeah, completely. I can completely get that. And also, when you say your voice being heard as a woman in on a board or in a leadership position, as compared like how do you make sure that your you your point of view or your direction is not vetoed by the 15 other men sitting across the table because you're a woman and a minority. So, that as a collective, I think is what you're trying to say, is what will help support each other. And that's what is already making a difference. But you've also said that why are we still having that conversation? So it has made a difference, but that equality hasn't really, it hasn't reached that level as yet. And you rightly said that women, especially mothers, have multiple roles to play, and the competence in that to be able to do both right is very challenging. But I think women, you do have a lot of you yourself are a prime example of that. As a woman leader, you're now a new mother. So for you also, it's a different experience. Whether you have your own company or you're employed, it's the same thing because you've got responsibilities in how you or in justifying what you do and doing it in a responsible way. No, I completely get where you're coming from. And yes, you did answer my question. So, Nadia,
Thank you, Karen.
one leadership habit that you think is completely overrated?
One leadership habit that it's completely overrated.
Now, it doesn't matter a woman or a man or anything, it's just essentially a leadership habit.
I was thinking of an underrating one. So because the ability to think is very underrated as leaders. How important it is to have time out and to find the space and the right headspace to be able to think strategically, take a little bit of a step back, looking from the outside and really underestimated as a value. All these different companies I visit, mentoring sessions I conduct, we always end up discussing the same thing. The overrated one is the how to express assertiveness. So the definition of expressing assertiveness, how do we define it as leaders? And we feel that, especially for female leaders, that need to emulate, feel that they need to emulate men to be able to show that they are assertive or because of the tone of voice, less emotional, and so on and so forth, rather than being aligned with who you are by being yourself and being as much as possible the authenticity.
Yeah.
We are slightly taking it to another level. That's why it's slightly, I feel that the narrative is being overrated to a certain extent. However, those are the first two thoughts that came to mind regarding leadership.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, underrated and overrated. Okay, a couple more, and then I'm going to let you go. Strategy or execution? What do you think fails more often?
Execution by
Really? And why?
yes.
Why, Nadia?
Because the day to day, I feel most companies, again, that I visit and I work closely with, the day to day challenges seem to take over. It's what's happening now, what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, at best next week. So when we're discussing strategy, which is again, I speak a lot about demystifying the strategy because sometimes even when you're in a boardroom, like strategy, how can we think of next year? How can we think? No, we're not, we used to discuss strategies, 3 year strategies, 5 year strategies. And in certain industries, we do have to speak of a longer term strategy. But since there are so many things happening here and now, again, it's diluting the importance of thinking of the future. However, these conversations about sustainability, about cybersecurity, about being ready for having more digital savvy, both from a policy perspective, from an implementation perspective, from the tools which we are using within the organization. Again, we feel that employees are already utilizing resources. We do not have a policy internally because we're still catching up, we're still thinking, we're still seeing, we're still analyzing which the best tools that we need to use within organizations. And still things are happening in the background. So we're playing catch up on strategic initiatives that are critical for the organization. So that's why execution seems to always lag behind because we discuss things, we seem to discuss things, we seem to agree on things. And if there is no follow up, if there is no support and saying someone that's really endorsing and following up or responding to, is responsible to respond to and report back to a board, to a governance structure, then the strategy just remains on paper.
So then it's pretty pointless. Yeah. If you're not able to take the strategy forward, into execution. Yeah, no, I get that. Okay.
Completely.
Yeah. If you have to give one piece of advice to CEOs that are actually navigating uncertain times, what would that one piece of advice be?
Make sure that you have trusted individuals around you that connect as your sounding board, as the people you can go to, as the people you can confide in, as the people that you can really bounce off your ideas and the challenges which you have at the moment. There is a lot and going on, and definitely when it's shared into a safe space with individuals that CEOs trust, whether they are mentors, whether they are board members, whether they are the non-exec chairman of the board, whether they are friends, individuals, whoever the CEO decides, as long as it's consistent and however it's needed, a group of people, individuals, a support structure.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you for this. And
Thank
it's
you,
been
Payal. It was a
such an
pleasure.
likewise, it's been so informative, and I'm sure there's a lot of learning in everything that you've said. There's been a lot of learning for me, and I'm pretty certain that it's the same for all the people who will listen and watch the episode. I've really enjoyed my time talking to you. Thank you once again.